Those of you who are here promptly on time. I'm going to take it kind of slow in the beginning just to give people a chance to amble in. But again, my name is Chappelow. If you're following dcrd development or any of our discussions, you may recognize me better by my little demon logo here and my handle ChapJC. So I started working on a block explorer in early 2017. I'm now the lead developer on it, and I'm here to give a talk about it called Nuts and Bolts of dcrd's Block Explorer dcrdata. So this is not just a chance to sort of showcase our block explorer. I want to take this opportunity to help anyone who is not as familiar with dcrd or the staking process, the governance system, to understand how it works and how you actually see that on the blockchain and on the block explorer. Because I think the Block Explorer helps visualize the staking process, the tickets, the votes, and generally the governance process. So I apologize for this, but I just want to ask just quickly to get an idea, feel for the audience. Who is familiar with the dcrd staking system, in particular the ticket lifecycle, so I understand how much detail to get into. Just if you know the ticket lifecycle, raise your hand. Okay, so like a small percentage of the people here. And I just want to give a plug to one of my colleagues. Dennis is going to be giving a talk in about an hour, 3:30 actually, so things are pushed back, talking about tickets and stake pools. So that's going to be helpful if you want to learn more about that. And my second question is, who understands how what a block explorer is for, and pretty much understand their function? Okay, so that's good. So I'll go over both, but I just wanted to get an idea. And who really just loves pop quizzes at the beginning of talks? No, not me. Okay. Okay. All right. So the first question, again, was what is a block explorer? So this is going to be fairly quick, just to brief, make sure I'm not losing anyone's attention just based on this fundamental. And then everyone else who does know what a block explorer is probably is wondering, you're making another block explorer? Really? There's a few of those, you know. So I'm going to talk about the motivation why we've done this and how it helps with dcrd. And then I'll just get into dcrdata and all of its features. So I think the meat of this is going to be in the live walkthrough, though. And after I kind of go through a few slides and everyone is falling asleep, I'll try to wake you up with actually bringing up the block explorer, running an instance on my laptop, and walk through and show you how you can see how the tickets and votes and the staking system works. Yeah, and I'll wrap it up after that. So what is a block explorer? So just for those who are a little bit less familiar with the cryptocurrency space, they're generally websites using for browsing blockchain data. So this can be ledger data such as blocks and transactions and addresses. And over here I've shown a screenshot of a pretty common one called Insight, listing blocks and transactions, but they're also useful for seeing other things like network status, such as the height of the blockchain. That is, how many blocks have been added on, mining difficulty, and other statistics and things that are of interest to people who are working on the network. And another feature that's not necessarily ubiquitous, but is pretty common, is pending or unmined transactions. Those that, so say you broadcast your own transaction, where does it go? It doesn't go right into a block. It goes into what's called mempool. And these are transactions waiting to be mined by the miners and put into a block. So this is a feature that helps show you can see your transaction is pending. In other words, it's waiting to be mined. And you can get an idea of where your fees stand. So pretty much every blockchain project will have one of these. And there's several widely used ones like Insight, BlockCypher, BTC.com has one. And some of these are open source. And the last thing about block explorers is the good ones usually provide an API for programmers. That's an application programming interface to work with it, gather data from the network, and in some cases broadcast transactions. So like Exodus, the wallet, if you're familiar with Exodus, they use the Insight API. Okay, and then the second part of this is, well, why do we need one? Well, in 2016, in early 2016, when dcrd mainnet launched, well, we didn't necessarily decide it was the most critical thing to start with. It was actually, we started with a fork of Insight. We made the necessary modifications to support the dcrd blockchain, which were considerable. But unfortunately, although it worked, it left out certain details, and it obscured or didn't represent properly a lot of the things related to governance that are actually so core to dcrd. So we needed to improve upon that. And myself and others in the community had a more philosophical reason, and that is our project should be driven by our code. And so for this reason, I mean, this is part of the reason that me and others decided that we would just get going and make our own. so that it could be ours and our code and adaptable to our needs. And the last region is more of a practical one. So the core Decred software, such as DCRD, the top of this little, not triad, but quadrat or whatever, this is the node software and the DCR wallet software. These are the core pieces of software, and they're written in Go. There's a rich set of libraries, very easy to work with. It made logical sense to sort of start fresh. You're seeing my Block Explorer pop-up notifications there. So what we ended up with was DCR data. Oh, good, that animation actually worked. So basically, this is a quite nice architecture. It's powered by Go as the programming language with an optional dependency on Postgres, which is a very powerful relational database. And this sort of drops a lot of the unfriendly dependencies that go along with Insight. Node, Angular, and unfortunately, newer versions just require certain Bitcore protocols, which obviously are no longer applicable. The result is a fast, lightweight, and simple program that essentially for people who work with Go is just amounts to go build and launch. Now I'm glazing over the config file headaches that bother a lot of people, but this is what it amounts to. And of course, it's open source, which goes with our general open source ethos. And you can find this on GitHub under our Decred organization. So I'm just going to go through some of the features. So on top of the usual Block Explorer functions like browsing blocks, browsing transactions, addresses, things like that, we paid a lot of attention to making sure that we could represent and convey information about tickets, ticket life cycles, understanding different types of stake transactions, things that drive the governance system in Decred. And this goes hand in hand with understanding and displaying information about the voting agendas. So a given vote will have choices made on a certain voting agenda, certain ongoing voting agendas that need to be decoded and represented. And then a more architectural decision for usability's sake was we built in WebSockets so you could get live updates. So that means, say there's a block that's mined, you don't have to sit there and hit F5, refresh every 3 seconds. It'll come through and it'll update your web page right away. And there's some more advanced utilities like decoding and broadcasting transactions. We have a very fast browser navigation using a JavaScript library that degrades very well without JavaScript. And now this is a sort of a controversial feature that I really like though, and that's these optional desktop notifications. And we made this a little bit more palatable by making one optional and extra optional in that it won't even ask you for it. You got to click on a special little dot on the screen, and I really love this so you don't have to be sitting there looking at your console to see when a new block rolls in. It'll just tell you. And of course, one of the key features of mature full-feature browsers is an API, and we developed our own custom API as well as we implemented the Insight API specs so that we could support wallets like Exodus, for example, and a lot of other services that rely on it. And very, very recently, we've had some pretty talented front-end developers working on rich charts to help show blockchain data, distribution of prices and so forth, things over time. And finally, as I mentioned before, it's open source. And we do this all under permissive open source licenses. We don't mess with GPL or anything like that. This is the Internet Systems Consortium license, which is very similar to the MIT and BSD licenses, if you know of those. Basically, no strings attached. Just don't blame me if it blows up your house. And finally, this is not something that's kind of just coming out. I mean, we're on 3.0. We have this released onto explorer.dcrdata.org, and I'm showing you a screenshot of the current stable version right now. We're working towards the next version right now, and I'm going to give you a preview right now of some of the stuff that we're doing in 3.1, and I'm going to explain how this relates to the governance system and the unique features of Decred. So here we go. So this is what the latest version looks like. So I just have the version down here, 3.1 at the bottom. These are sort of minor updates, things that aren't terribly huge. But on the left, you see there's chain state information, things that are of general information to a lot of people. The total supply of Decred, things like the ticket price at the moment, what it's going to be next has an estimate, and then block rewards, because these change periodically. And unlike Bitcoin that just halves it every however many months or years, this goes down slowly. It's a tapered change. And then last at the bottom here is the project fund balance. And I'm just sort of teasing you with this because this is the core of Decred's autonomous nature, is it's self-funding. And I'll get to that in a second. And over here at the top right, this is the latest transactions, what some people would think of as mempool. And then this is just a glance of their latest blocks. And so this is the home page to get you oriented. So let me just go to a block here. Block number 286,915 with 4 confirmations, and that means basically there have been four blocks mined after this. And the first thing that you see at the top here is approved equals true. And I wanted to have this at the top because this is a very key feature to Decred, and that is that the stake process, the governance process, is that the stakeholders will cast a vote on every previous block to say whether or not it's true, and this keeps the proof of work miners in check. And you'll see that if I look at the latest block, this would say pending true or maybe pending false if the stakeholders decide to punish a miner who's doing things that are against policy. So a lot of this looks very similar. You have a list of transactions. Here's your block reward, which I'll check in a minute. And I'm going to quickly skip over votes and tickets. Those are just transactions, though. There's nothing really mysterious about what is a ticket, what is a vote. They're transactions, and I'll get into that in a second. But let me just pick a random transaction here. These are regular transactions, and we chose a pretty common way of displaying this. Inputs on the left and outputs on the right. And so outputs are where you're paying to, and so this is a pretty common format of an address. Decred addresses begin with D. DS just means it's a pay to pub key hash. That's the type of address. And one of the nice things about the Block Explorer that's actually quite difficult with command line tools is, well, you want to see where it went. Well, it's going to say if it was spent or not, that particular output. And you just click true to take you to the transaction that, in fact, spent that. And now this leads us into the governance system. So somebody who made that last transaction decided to buy a ticket with that output. But I don't want to get ahead of myself because I know that I've been digesting the ins and outs of Decred transactions for a while, and I'm going to jump right back for a second to do a quick refresher on the Decred staking fundamentals for everybody. Just 2 slides, very quick. And I just went to the beginning of the talk. I love how that happens. Okay. I'm sure I could do this better. Okay. So there's a couple of key functions of the proof of stake system. And the first one is to approve proof of work mined blocks. The votes that are in one block approve the previous block. And I hinted at that already. Another function of this is to vote on consensus changes. And this is an on-chain voting process. Every ticket's vote, every spent ticket spent in a vote will have that record of those choices recorded on the blockchain. And that's how we make decisions of how to change the consensus rules. And the third sort of newer, less familiar reason for this is to vote on project proposals. So we have this development fund, this project fund, and these are things like, oh, we want to spend X amount of money for some project or some marketing, say. So, well, that's done through a system called Polite, which Marco Pierboom, who's over here, has been working tirelessly on. And this is done by looking at which tickets you actually own. So it's also driven by the stakeholders, but this is not done on-chain. So these are the main functions of the proof of stake system, tickets and votes. So voting, again, voting it requires a ticket. And at first, when I first got into Decred, I was a little bit mystified. Well, what the heck is a ticket? We have transactions, right? Well, yeah, a ticket is a transaction. It's just a special type of transaction. It has outputs that can only be spent in very specific ways. So that's why we just show it in a transaction section on the block view. And then this is another detail that is important to understand, is that part of what comes with buying a ticket is locking up the funds that you spend on the ticket for a period of up to, say, about 4.7 months, with an average time to vote of 28 days. And the idea here is that you take away some of your liquidity in order to have a say in the future of Decred and to gain the rewards. And so the first thing that voting does when you spend that ticket is indicates your choices on active agenda items. So this can be this ongoing agenda, which is, do we approve that previous block? Or it can be other agenda items, like enabling Lightning Network features or changing an algorithm or something like that related to the consensus. And last but not least, and this is everyone's favorite, is that voting rewards that stakeholder who bought that ticket and locked up their coins with new generated coins, and this is called stake base. So now, last slide on this refresher, and then we're going back to the walkthrough, and I'll show you how this actually works. So the way tickets work is like I said, it's a transaction. You buy a ticket, and then over a period of a certain number of blocks, it will mature, and it will go into what's called the ticket pool, and it becomes live. And at any time, it can be chosen and called to vote. And that's really what you want. And on average, that's every 28 days, but it can take much longer. And if you're listening and your wallet's online and configured to vote, or you have a stake pool, that ticket will vote in another transaction. And that's, technically speaking, this opcode here is used, but it's a vote transaction. On the other hand, if you're not configured or if your stake pool is offline or something like that, you can miss, and then you have to issue a revocation transaction. And this is another thing that's kind of confusing to newer users, is well, what happens if I don't vote? Do I lose all my money that I locked up? No, you get it back through the revocation. You just don't get the reward, and you don't get to say what you want on the given agenda items. You don't get a vote. And there is a small chance, less than 0.5%, that the ticket will not be called to vote over a period of 40,960 blocks, which is a very small chance, but it can happen, and those end up with a revocation too. So the point is, it's close to a guarantee that you're going to vote, but it's not a guarantee. And really, as I said, the reward for voting is, well, the reward in terms of coins, and then getting to make a choice, take part in the governance. Okay, so that was the refresher. Back to the walkthrough. Oh. If I can find, there it is. Okay, so now we're landing back on this ticket. So it looks just like any transaction, right? It has a hash, it says the time that it was in, the block that it was in. The difference is, I picked a complicated transaction. This is a pool transaction, but that's okay. Let me pick a ticket like this one. Okay, so here's a ticket. Somebody took 101 of their dcred, and they locked it up in this stake submission output. And then they've also specified an address, and then maybe this is getting too detailed, where they want the rewards to go. So this is not voted yet. So if you have a ticket, and you buy a ticket, and you want to check on it, you just look here at pool status. It'll say immature, so it's not yet joined the pool, but it's definitely not spent yet. So now, to show you how this progresses, let me go to a vote. So this is a vote, and like a Coinbase, it generates coin, except for we call this a stake base. So here's 1.18 new DCR that joined the total supply. And what is this second input? That is the locked dcred that went into the ticket. So the idea is you get your locked dcred back along with the reward, and it goes to one of your addresses as one of the outputs. So this is really nothing mysterious. I mean, it's not some sort of centralized server managing tickets and votes. It's all on chain. They're all transactions. They just have different opcodes. If that's getting too technical, I apologize. But what's in these opcodes is very important. So this one here encodes how you wanted to vote. So the Explorer essentially decodes all of that. And down here, the first thing it indicates is what you decided about the last block. This particular vote set the bit that said last block is valid. And if up to 3 votes, are mined in this current block that say the last block is valid, then it's going to be valid. Otherwise, it could be rejected, and those stake transactions will be disapproved and no longer be valid. And now depending on which voting agenda this tick vote is voting on, there will be different choices on these different issues. Now, this particular vote is voting on these Lightning Network features. So our developers of the DCR daemon, they implemented a number of features to implement Lightning Network interoperability. But the thing about dcred is things are not done unilaterally by the developers, by the miners. These are approved by the stakeholders. So this vote is just a piece, one of the many votes that will have their say on whether or not these are activated. Now, the thing is that I'm glazing over here is this agenda is already over. They already were activated. But if we're in the middle of active voting process, this would actually be a counted vote. So, and then there's another interesting thing here is that this is abstain. So this vote didn't specify an opinion on whether or not to enable these Lightning Network features, and that's by design. We don't want defaults for a vote to be no or yes. Just like voting in America, you have to have made up your mind and you have to get yourself to the polls and make the choice for yourself. Okay, so, and now you're looking at this vote. It gives you a lot of other useful information, like, well, what ticket was spent on this vote? And you just click on it, takes you back to the ticket. And that's very similar. Now it says pool status voted for this, this ticket right here, this special transaction. So you can either click on voted, take you right back to the vote, or you can actually follow this stake submission, which is your locked funds, and see, where did my locked funds go? Easy. They were the second output in the vote transaction, and they went to the address that I specified when I bought the ticket. No mystery about how your funds are locked and unlocked and how you get to vote. And it's all pretty clear, just looking at the Block Explorer. Let me see where I wanted to go next here before I continue to ramble. Yeah, so I think that pretty well illustrates how the tickets and votes work and how you can see. So you just click back on this logo to take you to the home page. And so now one part that's actually really the cool part here, I think, is that we have this nice menu, and somebody named Migwi in Nairobi, Kenya is a charts wizard. And I wanted to show you this particular chart because it illustrates a lot of good things about Decred and how adaptable it is. This is the ticket price, starting from when Mainnet launched in early 2016 until now. So it's really quite volatile. This is the amount of money that's required, according to the consensus rules. How much Decred do you have to lock up in a ticket for a period of time in order to have a vote, in order to gain that reward and have a choice? And that's governed by an algorithm that says, based on how big the ticket pool is, we may need to raise the price or lower the price, and it's all automatic. So that algorithm kept the ticket pool pretty much stable, but man, was that ticket price out of control. It went up and down and went all over the place. And it became a real big point, and we solicited algorithms that could be a replacement for that ticket price. One good candidate went in, it was implemented, and it was set up to a vote. So the code for the new algorithm was dormant. People installed the new version with the new algorithm not yet running, and then it was placed to a vote. And when the voting process went through and the new algorithm, we call it the SDiff algorithm, was approved, it went into effect seamlessly. There was no unanticipated hard forks, no arguing, no nothing like that. The ticket price algorithm changed overnight, smoothed it out. So this is a visual for the adaptability of Decred. So I really like this one. So that's ticket price. We have lots of different charts, but another one I want to show you, which is pretty exciting to a lot of people, is the proof of work difficulty and the fact. My wife asking me how it's going. How the difficulty has skyrocketed in the last several months, and this is quite a good sign of network health. And it's been going up ever since the launch of the network, but just recently a number of ASICs have been released. I think Bitmain released an ASIC, DB3 or something like that. So this is pretty cool. But yeah, the ticket price chart, this is one of the most exciting ones to me. It meant a lot to me personally too, because a lot of us spent a lot of time figuring out how to fix this. Okay, so those were the two charts that I thought were really the most interesting. So the next part of the walkthrough that I think is really worth showing is the agendas. So the different votes will vote on these different issue items. I showed you one that voted on Lightning Network features. Well, this is the SDiff algorithm. This particular agenda ID was the one that changed the SDiff algorithm. So this just gives a little bit of information about when this was going on. And you can follow when you look and you see when it was going on. You can follow the progression of the vote. So these are a lot of new features. I don't think a lot of the community has been playing with them yet, but everything about the governance process is very transparent through the Block Explorer. Yep, and so I mentioned this, an advanced decode broadcast. This is pretty standard, so it's nothing to talk about, but if you have a transaction you want to rebroadcast, maybe you're not running full node, maybe you have a different use case, you can do that here too. Yeah. Okay, so now one final page on this groovy menu is mempool. So as I mentioned before, these are transactions that are waiting to be mined, and I'm scrolling past the votes because that opens a can of worms. But if you broadcast a transaction, it'll land in mempool right here. So this one here says 38 seconds in mempool. So while we were talking, someone broadcast that transaction, and it landed in this table. And it's always updating, but if somebody broadcasts a transaction, it'll just land smack right in here too. So these are, if a new block comes in, these tables will hopefully get cleared out if these transactions are included in a block, and it'll start fresh. Oh, there we go. We got a new block mined. A number of new votes came in mempool for 4 seconds now. So the network really comes to life. Okay. So that's pretty much what I wanted to walk you through. And at the end of this, we can talk about anything you want. We could go back to that, and we could look at things in more detail. So what are we doing next? Well, there's a lot of features that we want to implement in versions going forward, but upcoming very soon in the 3.1 release, which is actually just branched off right now, is we're going to bring the Insight API spec support out of beta because we really want to support third-party services that rely on Insight and expect Insight. And I think what I showed you today was the actual new page stylings. It's very subtle. We got some big changes coming for 4.0 down the road, but what I didn't show you was some cool visualizations of the block contents and stats and like a material design kind of card view. So things are about to get a little bit more pretty. Things are very functional right now. They reveal a lot about the governance, but it's not the kind of really, really sexy view that you get from people who work in JavaScript all day. And of course, we're going to expand the API because almost every day somebody comes by and says, well, we could use this piece of data in this JSON response of this API. And it's an ongoing request, and Marco's one of those. But anyway, and there's some more technical changes that we want to make to the database to support other address types. And one that I want to research is supporting extended public keys, which has an impact on whether you want to, on HD wallets, if you want to watch a string of addresses. And this has a lot of engineering challenges. So my point is, whether this works out or not, it's an active development, and we're supporting the Decred community however we can. And so before I go to questions, I have to acknowledge this was an effort by a lot of people. I had this slide said 23 contributors yesterday. And I got 2 more pull requests with really good fixes. People are getting involved. And moving towards the 3.1 release, I'm just naming these 4 people, but there's been a lot more. The RADA group is a contracting group that has played a big role in this. Am I running out of time? Yeah, you're running out of time. Oh, okay. Anyway, the whole Decred development team and the community, because they're always providing feedback and helping with this. So anyway. Sounds like I'm done, but if there are any questions, I can try to field those.
Yes, please.
Sure.
SPV?
Yeah, no. So the Block Explorer does require a full node running, so there's no special support for simplified payment verification at this point, but yeah, there should be. It depends on the features that we want to see first and what plans we make. So. Was there something specific that you would like to see displayed regarding SPV?
Right, yeah, I was wondering if you guys were actually planning on adding some specific SPV portions to it, right? So it's a bit iffy, right? Because I'm not sure it will actually show anything. If we do it right, there's nothing to show, right? Yeah. Yeah. But I was wondering if there was any impact on that actually, because I honestly don't know if that's going to impact dcrdata. I don't think so, but yeah, it may be that we can run dcrdata without a full node. I don't think that's practical, but in terms of showing transactions that are related to SPV, I'm not sure if it really relates, but yeah.
Does your Insight API use Bitcore or dcrd?
It's dcrd. So none of this uses Bitcore, but the specification for the Insight API is followed. So it accurately returns responses in the format and with the same semantics as the Insight API.
Also, was it difficult to convert the Insight API from like using Bitcore to dcrd, or was that a pretty simple process? Well,
so we started with a custom API. So we returned data that I thought was useful. And at some point, we decided, okay, we do need to support clients that rely on the Insight API specification. So it's really, for the most part, a matter of massaging the data into these different JSON formats. The queries were not terribly different, so it wasn't a big job.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, sure. I'll take questions offline.
Yeah. So we actually need to go to our next presenter, which is going to be David Vorick. He's going to be presenting on SciAttack as well as the storage of it. But you are welcome to speak with John out the doors. And thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. Please give him a huge round of applause.